Hello, I'm Anna the Wolf, and I'm so glad you've joined me for another transformational tale. Now, last time we met, you were curled up out on a trail just outside the forest's edge, having met a mountain lion, and you wake up fresh and new and ready for a new day. And with your pocket watch now affixed to your coat, ticking away, you continue merrily on your way and think, whew, that was a rough night out there with the mountain lion. I think what I need to do is away myself to the ocean for some real respite. I need deep rest. And so you skip down the trail so light, lighter than you'd ever felt in your entire life. And you just sang songs to yourself, just full of delight and mirth and like a new person. And when you got to the ocean, you walked through the dunes and out onto an expanse of beach that glistened with white sand. And it was just you and the waves, and you threw yourself back in the sand and just allowed the sun to soak your skin and the wind to gently cool your body from the rays. And you just listen to the waves breaking and the soft, quiet sounds of nature all around you. And you must have been laying there for quite some time before you felt like giving a good long stretch. And as you did, you opened your eyes, and out of nowhere, you saw a shadow pass over you, and it went soaring by. And then you thought, that's interesting. That was must be a pretty big bird up there. And then it came back and passed by again, and you saw a shadow cast, and it passed directly overhead. But this time the shadow was very small. And so you watched, not fully awake, just more interested, honestly, in being with the waves and the sea and the sun. And so it was just with mild interest that you noted that there was a bird passing back and forth over where you laid on the sand. And off it went in one direction, and the shadow seemed quite large. And then it swooped back, and the shadow seemed so much smaller, but rounder, not quite as streamlined as the first shadow. And then you heard rustling in the bushes behind you, and out stepped one by one a motley crew of very small-statured animals. Perhaps it looked like maybe they were the smallest examples of their species. There was what appeared to be a draft horse, but it was the size of a pony. And then behind him stepped out an Irish wolfhound, the largest of dog breeds, but he was the size of a chihuahua. And then following him was an enormous, well, it should have been an enormous Flemish giant rabbit, but it was no larger than the smallest, tiny dwarf rabbit. And they all looked and had all the features of their counterparts, the largest of their breeds, but they were very in miniature. And they all scuttled out and stood on the shore, watching the shadow pass by. And then when they looked up, each of them in turn said, "Hey, look at him! Oh my word. Check him out! Have you ever seen anything funnier in your life?" And that's when you looked up to really get a good look at what was passing back and forth. And swoosh, overhead went a hawk. And then somewhere in mid-flight, he changed form and swoosh came back. And it was a chicken. Just a rooster, a round rooster who still had the capability of flight. And when he came soaring back, he was a rooster. And then back he went, and he was obviously combing the beach for his food. With each pass when he went by, the three who were gathered there pointed and jeered and like, "Ah, look at him! You're a hawk. You're a chicken. You're a hawk. You're a chicken. No, you're just a hawk. No, look at you now. You're a chicken. Oh my gosh. Have you ever seen something so ridiculous in your life? And you watched as every time they announced, you're a hawk, he looked as though something had changed in him and he switched into a hawk. And every time they said, no, you're a chicken, it looked as though somebody had punched him in the stomach and he took the blow and suddenly transformed into that which they had just named him. And he was going back and forth, and you were watching him as they kept calling out name after name. He would transform into whatever chicken or hawk they called out. It didn't even seem to be within his capability to be one or the other consistently. And you watched this for a while, and you thought, what suffering that poor animal has. He's distorted. Both shapes seem entirely untrue in some way. And so you watched for maybe 20 or 30 minutes before you found this animal to be suffering greatly, and to the delight of the small animals, the miniatures. They were so fascinated with the transformation and being able to call him out and watch him twist and writhe into a new shape. And you became sick to your stomach watching this poor tortured animal in the air. And you called out, hawk, please stay hawk. And he could not help but change form. And then you thought, but maybe that's not really the right animal. And then you called out, chicken! And he became a chicken. And you found yourself somehow participating in his transformation, and you realized it was out of this animal's control not to suffer. And so you sat quietly and you thought, what an awful, awful life. And it soared closer, and you saw he was gasping for breath, exhausted. And you called out to him, what can I do to help you? Is there anything I can do? And he swooped back as a hawk and said, please, take your sword out. End this, please. Have mercy. And he swooped back as a chicken and cawed. Please, if you have any mercy in you, you'll use your sword to end this torture for me. You're like, oh, you ask such a horrible thing. I cannot do this. But with each pass, you realized it was the only thing you could do for this poor creature. And you reached out and with much consideration, put your sword to the sky. But you couldn't quite do it yourself. You could not bring yourself to slay this animal. And right in the mid-flight, as he was changing form, the three animals, the Clydesdale that was not quite a Clydesdale, the Irish wolfhound that was not quite an Irish wolfhound, and the Flemish giant that was just a mere shadow of a giant, all started in turn calling out different names, different chicken hawk, chicken hawk, chicken hawk. And there was just a puff of feathers, and you held your sword up, and the bird drove himself into the sword. And you thought he'd split himself in two. There was just an enormous puff of feathers. And you shook your head, and you looked at the three who were jeering, and you said, leave this place. Look what you've done. And they hung their heads, and they walked with shame back into the dunes. And you sat next to the feathers, and you were crying. You laid your sword down, and you heard from behind you, like, Leave me a moment of peace. I'm grieving my friend, the chicken hawk. And then you felt a distinct tap on your shoulder. It was a little rigid, actually. And you turned and you saw it was a curved beak. And you're like, who's back there? And you looked behind you, and out stepped a very small hawk. And he just perched on your shoulder. He said, actually, I'm not a chicken, and I'm not a hawk, and I've always been a kestrel. And I do hope you'll call me by name. Thank you. Thank you for holding your sword up, that I might become one whole creature of my own naming. And with that, he alit into the sky in the most beautiful, beautiful pattern of colors that you have ever seen. And indeed, it was a kestrel. I'm so glad you were able to join me here at the beach today to hear about the chicken hawk that was a kestrel. And I hope that you'll join me again, Anna the Wolf, for another transformational tale. And I hope that you like this. Give it a thumbs up, give it a like, maybe share it with some friends who also like tales, and then subscribe if you want to hear more stories. Thank you so much for joining me. I truly love sharing stories with you, and I look forward to telling you another one. Thank you. Goodbye.